Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living life to the fullest? Are you ready and willing to transform yourself and your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Well, it's a brand new year, so what are you waiting for? Welcome to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Well, as promised, I've begun this new year, 2019, with offering you some new and very practical practices to aid you on your spiritual path. I hope that you are already enjoying the success of the New Year's resolution practice that I gave you. Remember that very particular practice, and you can add in whatever else you want. Don't overload yourself, but make sure, if nothing else, to engage the one that I prescribed in the last episode. So today we'll look at another practice, and this practice is a little unexpected and incredibly powerful. So this is the practice of confession, right? Oh, you didn't expect to hear that out of me, did you? But confession is actually a very powerful spiritual practice. Now, generally when we think of confession, images of sitting in a booth in a stuffy church telling your sins to a priest comes to mind, right? I know that's usually what would come to mind for me. The simple version of confession is that you just sit there behind a screen and you confess your deepest and darkest sins to a priest, and they'll either offer you advice or they'll tell you something like, oh, recite 10 Hail Marys, and then all of a sudden, boom, magically, you're forgiven. All of your sins are washed away and you're forgiven. While verbally purging yourself of your sins in order to help ease your conscience makes you feel better, and they say it's good for the soul, this holds no more value than fooling yourself into believing falsely that God has forgiven you. It's just a way to ease your conscience and make you feel better, but it has no substance. So how can confession have value as a spiritual practice? Well, I'd like to share a practice with you that helped me greatly over the years, and it's one that I haven't shared before now. The idea of confession is that you yourself acknowledge your own shortcomings, your personal lacks, your failures. This is the first point. You see, in a spiritual practice of confession, it's important that you admit these personal shortcomings to yourself. This is far more important and beneficial than telling them to someone else. The idea is supposed to be that the priest is closest to God and that by you telling them they can convey it on, right? Come on. We need to look at this as an adult. And as an adult, we can't put this off on someone else. We have to accept responsibility. So in the spiritual practice of confession, the important thing is that we ourselves admit these personal shortcomings. We have to take ownership of them. And this is what makes the spiritual version of confession so practical, real, and beneficial. You see, when you confess your sins to a priest or someone like that, it's really not offering any assistance to promote personal change in you. Therefore, you're apt to continue the same undesirable, poor behaviors due to the false belief that someone's forgiving you simply because you verbalized your sins. In the spiritual practice of confession, we must admit and acknowledge our own shortcomings and take responsibility for making the necessary changes in ourselves in order to prevent mindlessly repeating the same old poor habitual behaviors. It's through this spiritual practice of confession, and don't worry, I'll be explaining the practice itself to you in great detail later. But it's through this spiritual practice of confession that we become willing to recognize our own personal imperfections. Through this, we can more effectively connect to a sense of true reality. Think about that for a moment. You see, the tendency is to hide from our shortcomings, as the ego is just simply not a fan of paying attention to such things. Look again at the modern religious practice of confession. You are hidden away in a private booth, behind a curtain, with only a little screen between you and the priest, to help you remain somewhat anonymous as you make your confession. But see, this reinforces the aspect of hiding from reality. Hiding from the reality of recognizing and acknowledging our own shortcomings, without truly addressing them in a way that allows us to rise above them and become a better person. If we acknowledge our own shortcomings through spiritual confession, we're naturally led towards the path of change through our desire of self-improvement. This is a crucial step that is usually not included in the religious form of confession. Now, I'm the first to admit here that acknowledging our personal shortcomings is not a pleasant task. But I assure you, it's necessary for self-improvement and spiritual cultivation. The spiritual practice of confession has us taking a hard, honest look at ourselves. And this requires us to be completely, 100% honest and truthful with ourselves. Too often, the ego resists this form of self-honesty, as it favors the delusional version of reality that it's created for you. We cannot fall victim to that. We cannot allow the ego to control the narrative. This sort of practice allows us to quiet the ego and see the truth for ourselves, if we have the courage to do so. It should be no surprise by now that real spiritual practices require this brand of courage. Now, acknowledging our shortcomings is not enough to invoke change. Be very cautious not to fall into the trap of falsely believing that acknowledging our faults is enough, because I assure you it is not. Not at all. The next step is to take action that will result in making lasting changes that result in your personal growth and self-improvement. Too often in this information age where people are stuck in their left brain, I notice that people think, oh, okay, if I acknowledge, this thing that I did that I didn't handle very well, that I could have done better. If I acknowledge that, then that's as far as I have to go. That's good. And I can start to feel better about myself. But you see, that's not any better than the religious version of confession. No, in the spiritual version, we have to acknowledge it, and then we have to invoke the experience. We have to actually take action, because it's the action that produces the wisdom and allows for change. Now, a key to success with the spiritual confession practice is mindfulness and intention. When you perform the practice, it's imperative to remain mindful of what your purpose is, not allowing this to become a mindless mechanical practice. As with any ritual, if you're just going through the motions, it takes any of the potency out of the practice or the ritual. The other thing is that you have to hold the intention of self-honesty and self-improvement as you go through the practice. So, remaining mindful and remaining clear of your intention, both of these things are critical for success in spiritual confession. While it may be incredibly uncomfortable to perform this practice at first, as you begin to take an honest look at yourself and your shortcomings, I can assure you of one thing: it does get better as you go. As you engage the practice, on a regular, consistent basis, the uncomfortable nature will lessen and you will get more comfortable with this type of process. The important point is to perform the practice daily. It's this consistency that leads us to a sense of mindfulness for our shortcomings that then allow us to change these undesirable behaviors. This comes down to being a daily method for checking yourself. And in the process, it weakens the ego without you even having to worry about trying to do that. Because you become willing to acknowledge these shortcomings, these failures, and you're no longer buying into the fluffy narrative of the ego. From my own personal experience with this practice, which I did every day for over 3 years, I can tell you that in the beginning, when I began performing this practice every single day, without ever missing a day for over 3 years, I found it to be rather uncomfortable. Why? Because when I decided that I would really take an honest look at myself, I didn't particularly like what I saw. There were many things about myself and about my actions that I regretted. And so many faults in my character, so many character flaws, that oftentimes I found myself actually in tears after coming out of this practice. And sometimes afterwards, I couldn't even do anything. I would just sit there and sob. And that's good. That's, if that happens, go with that. Let that, it purges that. But I'm just helping to prepare you that this can happen. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. But I find the more brutally honest that you are with yourself, the more likely this is to happen. And it depends on the state of your ego and the type of person you've become, and more importantly, how far away you've managed to stray from being the person you were meant to be. And I'm sharing this to be completely transparent with you and share my own experiences with this. But I also want you to understand that this should not lead to depression. Yes, you don't maybe particularly enjoy some of the things you come to realize about yourself. But that doesn't mean you have to get depressed. See, depression over these negative aspects of your character is just the ego resisting the truth. That's all it is. Instead, you need to have the courage to face yourself as you are, shortcomings and all. You have to accept that that's your starting point. That's where you are. And take some form of comfort in the fact that you are actively engaging a practice that can help you make changes in yourself so you no longer behave in the ways that you determine are undesirable. Now, today it seems very popular to hold the idea that, oh, I accept myself just as I am. I'm perfect the way I am, right? I'm seeing memes of this. I hear this all the time. This is a fluffy, twisted, fake spirituality. And it's being pushed on everybody, but it's completely fake and false. This twisted reality version is actually serving to inflate the ego. And it's being perpetuated as spirituality, but it's simply fake spirituality. In true spirituality, we accept ourselves, but in the manner of, I accept where I am through the acknowledgement of my faults so that I know how to move ahead. And you see, when I went through that practice, when I would come across these things, these realizations of my faults, and it was upsetting to me, I used that as fuel. See, I used that to inspire me to want to change. See, there's value in that. That's why we don't hide from it. When you hide from it, you'll never possess the inspiration that has to come from within yourself in order to make the necessary changes you want to become the person you want to be, that you know you were meant to be. So as I engaged this practice every day as just one of the many practices I did every single day, I acknowledged these things about myself that I really didn't like about myself, I didn't respect myself for, and I felt as though I really didn't love myself very much at that point. And how could I? Because the ego was so dominant that I didn't even really know who I was. I pondered that if I felt this way about myself, how could anybody else enjoy my company? How could anybody else like me as a friend? How could anyone else even love me? I certainly didn't feel worthy of anyone else's love. And it was these feelings that prompted me to want to change, to make the resolution within my own mind, my own heart, that I didn't want to be that way anymore. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to be better. I wanted to behave better. I wanted to be able to like myself, to come to love myself. And believe me, when I started this practice, there was no shortage of things about myself that I wanted to change. I had no shortage of things that I found, and so many things. But as I did this, it allowed me to get really deep into myself and trace all this stuff back to things that were at the root of a lot of these behaviors. And yeah, of course, the ego was there, and it was a lot of things based on fear and all these other things that came up. So I'm not going to go into detail about that, because I want you to have to experience this for yourself, because that's the only way you can come to understand it. Each of us have to experience it in our own way for ourselves. But I'm sharing a little bit here to help you understand what to expect when you get involved in this practice. So, as I stated previously, I often ended up in tears as I performed this practice, sometimes sobbing afterwards. But don't feel bad for me, because it was exactly what I needed. It is exactly what each of us need, although we don't want it. Although we don't want to have to accept this fact. But it was through this practice that I was and continue to be capable of making changes to myself that has helped me become the type of man I wanted to be, the type of man I knew I was meant to be, a better man than I was, beyond a doubt. All right, then. How about I share this powerful practice with all of you? After all, I did promise that in the beginning of 2019, I would be sharing more practical spiritual practices with you. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to break this into stages for you, so it's very digestible, very easy to work with. The first stage is this. You set up as you would for any other form of meditation, contemplation, or visualization practice. Okay? Find somewhere quiet where you won't be disturbed by people or pets. Turn off the phone. Sit quietly, relax, take a few deep breaths, and center yourself. You know the drill by now. Here you go. As you do that, start to visualize and reflect back on your day, on the previous day. Think about one thing that happened that you don't really feel very good about. Now, maybe there were several things to choose from. Don't overwhelm yourself with this, because then it can get a little rough, even more rough. And just pick one thing that maybe you regret the way you handled or didn't handle or whatever it was, right? So you reflect on this and you choose one circumstance from the day that you don't feel good about. Maybe it's something you said, maybe it's something you did, basically some form of action where you were not the best version of yourself. You were not living up to your potential by any means. Now, as you look back upon this circumstance, you see yourself act in an embarrassing or at least unfortunate way. And I would ask you to sit with that for a while, be with that for a little bit. Let that feeling well up. Let those emotions come up, the physical sensations come up. that are not that good. See, you're going to use that. You're going to use that as fuel, as motivation to help you not want that anymore. Okay? So you allow those things to rise up. It's okay. And then you're going to actively confess to yourself how this is not how you desire to act, or that you fully realize that you wronged someone in some way. The confession is done silently within your own mind, only for you to know. And this isn't a form of hiding, because you're no longer hiding from yourself. Telling these things to someone else does you no good. It's a Band-Aid, a superficial fix that makes you feel a little better. But it's tricking yourself. It's fooling yourself into believing that there's any real value in it. What we're doing is we're getting to experience these things personally and directly with ourselves, taking ownership of them. Okay? So basically, you choose a circumstance throughout the day that was unfortunate, where you weren't acting in a way that you would really have liked to have acted. And you let that happen as you visualize it, you feel it in things, okay? So just do that for a few moments. You don't need to do it very long. You don't need to torture yourself. It isn't about that, right? That isn't the point of this exercise. So once you've done that, then what you're going to do is you're going to visualize yourself handling that exact same situation, but in a more productive, positive manner. And at the same time, you're going to allow the emotions and the physical sensations that arise as you visualize this, and you're going to be with those feelings for a little while. You're going to see yourself responding in more of a way that reveals your full potential. You're going to visualize yourself handling the situation with a sense of steadfast confidence, compassion, and wisdom, and in a way that benefits everyone involved. Be with these emotions and physical feelings that are produced as you visualize yourself handling it the way that you would have desired to handle it if you were being the best version of you. But remember what I said earlier? This is not enough. Next, you have to take action. You have to start to live it. You have to start to actually become the person you visualize handling things the way that you would prefer. And the way you do this is you just self-check. If you're engaged in a situation, you start to handle it through that old, poor habitual behavior. Stop yourself. Catch yourself, right? Shut it down. Take a moment. Take a breath. And then make sure that whatever you say, whatever you do, is more in line with what you visualize yourself doing, who you visualize yourself being. So you have to do it. And ideally, we would like to catch ourselves before we even get started. Okay, so maybe something comes up, you feel a feeling or thought well up, and you go, oh, that's old behavior. I don't want to behave that way anymore. I'm going to handle this situation better. See, that's why we say response instead of react. You don't want to be reactive, where you're reacting out of ego and uncontrolled emotion. Instead, maybe remain quiet for a minute. Smile. Say, okay, shake your head. Contemplate what you need to be. How can I handle this situation better than I usually do? And then respond in kind. If you forget and get caught up in the moment, try to catch yourself. Shut it down, regroup, start again. I actually did this as I was face to face with people. As I caught myself doing this, I would say, all right, just a minute. I'm sorry. Just give me a second. And I'd take a couple deep breaths, and I'd figure out within those couple deep breaths a better way to handle this situation and go, you know what? Yeah, this is my fault. Let's look at it this way. Let's handle this way. And I started to do that, and the more I started to do that, the better that I realized I was becoming. And I was getting closer and closer and closer to becoming that person that I visualized myself being. I was handling things in a way that I visualized myself handling them. And it was fantastic. So you see, spiritual confession, this is the practice. It's that simple. But this spiritual confession is a way for us to check ourselves every day so that we don't fall back into the old mindless behaviors, so that we can keep ourselves moving forward on this path. And this particular practice doesn't have to take that long. I mean, you're welcome to spend some serious time with it, especially in the beginning if you really need to, or if the situation involved in the visualization calls for that. But this really doesn't have to take that long. I mean, you can do this. It used to take me 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes I do a half an hour with this. But after a while, it got to where it was a 5-minute thing. It was like, oh, I know exactly what I did today. That was what I would consider a poor behavior that I wish that I would have handled differently. I know exactly what it is. I sit there, call up the feeling. Yep, there it is. And then I think about how I could handle it better. What I found is that I did this practice. The longer I did the practice, the more consistently I did the practice, the quicker and easier it was for me to come up with the way that I started to already know how I should have handled it. In other words, by the time I was doing this exercise, it's like I don't even need to contemplate it. I don't need to think about how I could have handled it differently. I already know. I just dropped the ball. And that's progress. And then that allows you to start to take that out into the world and use it in real time. You have to take that action if you expect the results. Most often in esoteric Japanese spirituality systems, they refer to this process of confession as songe. Okay, so this is what we're going to work with. So yes, confession is a spiritual practice, and this is when it's being performed correctly and being performed with benefit instead of the watered-down version that it has become. Give it a shot. Give it a try. See if you can't become the person that you know in your heart you were always meant to be. And make sure to visit me at www.expansionmastery.com. Grab the Appreciation Mastery Program. That'll help you shape up the 2019 new year in a great way, raising your vibration, opening your heart, getting you ready to handle these practices. You can also get an autographed copy of Expansion Mastery, the Practical Guide to Living a Fully Engaged Life, and that is the only place that those are available. The only place you can get autographed copies of my book is from my website. The only place that carries the Appreciation Mastery Program as well as the Breath Bridge program is my website. Make sure and go there, get what you need. Also, do all of the like, subscribe, comment, thumbs up, hearts, whatever, all of that crazy social media stuff is that we need. Please spread this podcast. Please get the show out to people. I need you to help me do that. Together, we can spread real spirituality and allow this consciousness shift to keep gaining momentum at a time when it is being actively suppressed. Till next time, my friends, I wish you the very best in your practices and your life, and a fantastic 2019. Take care.